All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Appreciate you attending today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about upside down talent management. And really, the reason that I picked this topic at this time is this is usually everybody's on a different calendar, but this is usually when I see a lot of folks are starting to look at their talent management as a whole. I'll see HR and leaders start to look at sometimes doing quarterly discussions or end of year discussions around succession planning. Sometimes people are doing the nine box discussion. Um, but what I find is a lot of times there's these strategy discussions about what's happening with talent and what skills do they need to fill, but it's often based on data that's not necessarily the most qualitative data. Mainly because there's not the year-round practices that set you up to really understand what talent you have and what talent you need. So today I'm going to walk through kind of the top five errors that I see being made and what I recommend to kind of offset some of that and minimize the human error and bias that kind of shows up when it comes to planning for talent. As an introduction, my name is Heather MacArthur. I work with the executive advisory firm, and we do a lot of coaching around areas like this, whether it's coaching leaders themselves to do some of the basics that I'm going to be talking about, the foundational pieces that I'll go over, or partnering with HR and senior executives around how to make sure that by the end of the year, when you are making those talent decisions, that they are based on something strategic and something that really aligns with what needs to get done, and that your data is sound. So, what's the purpose of your talent management process? And I put that out to all of you to start to think about because I find that most leaders, if I ask them, oh, what's the purpose of this process? Why do you do it this way? There's usually some answer of, well, this is just the way HR has us doing it. And if I talk to HR and I say, well, what's the purpose of the process? It's usually like, well, this piece happens for this reason, or this piece happens for that reason. We're in the middle of revising that piece, but it often feels disconnected and not necessarily cohesive. So it should consider these three areas if you're looking at your talent management process. And when I'm talking about talent management, I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about what you're doing around performance management, hiring and recruiting processes, onboarding processes, what you're doing to assess, the skills that are needed for the future and that, the business planning around that, as well as the learning and development that you provide to the employees. So the three things to think about is your talent management process more tactical versus human centric? And what I mean by that is sometimes I'll go to an organization and I'll see that they have a very well organized calendar of events when it comes to their talent management process. And it ends up being that they're doing these conversations, but the actual kind of engagement with employees isn't happening that strong. Or there is no calendar and people are doing things based on the fires that are cropping up. Oh, we're getting turnover in that department, so now we need to pay attention to it. We're behind on, technology skills, so now we need to recruit for it, but that's a reactive process. So I really recommend that you start thinking about what's the human side of this? How are the people experiencing the culture? How are experiencing the job? And it's not just we're checking things off on the list. The other thing is it tends to be event oriented. As I mentioned, there's a fire that happened, or there's things that are, popping up, or it's, hey, it's the end of the year, so let's go ahead and do our discussion, whether it's the nine box or whatever it might be. And if you're not familiar with the nine box, I'll go over it during this session. Or is it process oriented? You'll see that I really recommend that you have a year-round calendar. As much as I said, it shouldn't be a year-round calendar of just events that HR and leadership are doing together, but that the process really feeds into supporting the human experience on the job. And then last but not least, is it people or is it performance focused? Now, I know that this can get a little confusing because I just said make it human centric. What I mean by the people versus performance is that when it comes to how we discuss things, how often are we saying things like, oh, we're going to talk about our top talent today or the high performers. And these are common things that we say, but what ends up happening is we kind of make it as if some people got it and some people don't. And that really kind of tapers into how people talk about things on the job. So even if we go down to how people discuss ratings, well, I'm a leading the way employee. Like, well, you're a unicorn. Like I can't really rate you as a human being, but I can rate the work that you're doing. And so it starts to become problematic around our feedback that we give employees or don't give employees. So I really recommend that when you're discussing things, whether that's assessing who should be moving up or being prepped to move up into leadership positions, or whether or not there, which group needs to be evolved in a certain way, that it's all focused on what's the performance that's being delivered. And I'm going to get into what does it mean to really be discussing performance versus just discussing people. So the analogy I like to give is that a lot of times when it comes to talent management, we like to do the things that feel easy, and honestly a little bit more enjoyable. And so you're going to see here that I've got one picture of makeup and the other picture of food. And what I'm thinking of is that a lot of times, and some of you may be able to relate with this, and some of you are like, I don't do my own makeup, so this is not my thing. But it's a little bit of, I don't think there's anything wrong with makeup. I loved playing with makeup since I was a little girl, but it's this idea of, are we using makeup to cover up our lack of health? So when I didn't get enough sleep, when I've been sick for a while and I'm using makeup to kind of cover that up, or at one point, I remember going to a makeup counter and I said, what do you have for dry skin? And the lady just looked at me really bluntly and she's like, well, how much water are you drinking? And I'm like, I didn't come here for a lecture, lady. Give me give me my mascara, let me go. Um, but what that really called out was, look, makeup is fine, but you've also got to be taking care of yourself and doing the nutrition. And so when I'm talking about talent management, these things like the 9 box discussion, or that we're doing succession planning, or we're going to set goals, like all those things are little pieces, but they've got to sit on a healthy process that's happening throughout the year. That's the nutrition. That honestly, it starts with what conversations are employees having with managers every day, but also intentional conversations throughout the year. I'll even say a major ingredient that I think is almost like water, even though I mentioned it before, is goal setting. Are the goals actually meaningful for the employees? And if they're not, if they're set and then they're just completely forgotten for the entire year, or they're set and it's just a things to do list, then when we go and we look at talent, I don't know if as we're examining what people are capable of, that we even know what they're capable of, because did we set them up to really do meaningful things? So we want to make sure that the nutrition, the foundation of your talent management is set up well. So, is it upside down, your talent management process? What I tend to see is an emphasis on talent planning. And then, sometimes there's reviews and ratings and merit. And then at the bottom are goals. And I want us to flip that. And now the bottom foundation, it's still goals, but it's such a bigger part of what the equation is. The performance tracking alignment is kind of like your meat and potatoes throughout the year. And then what that does is it feeds into and creates that quality talent planning. So the pyramid rule number one that I want to recommend to all of you is that data is only as good as the process used to generate it and the context in which it's generated. So what I mean by that is, do you have a year-round process? We can call it performance management. That's what people normally relate to. But I see it as a process to make sure that there's alignment between employees and their managers, and then also that there's engagement. So this context in which it's generated. So I could take this data and go, oh, these people didn't, meet their deadline. Okay, but if I'm ignoring the context of, maybe they were in an industry that was heavily impacted by tariffs this year, or they were in a situation where they had, their CEO left and it was a whole organizational transformation. Well, the goals can't just be done in kind of a vacuum. They've got to be done within the context of the challenges and the opportunities that are present at that time. And so when we look at data, it can't just be data all by itself. We've got to also think the context in which it was collected. Some of you might be familiar with this if you've done workshops with me, but I have a year-round feedback calendar that I like to recommend to folks. This is how, when I'm managing people, this is the rhythm that I have them on. This is the nuts and bolts. And I will tell you, it's kind of like working out. People want to, what pill can I take and what crash diet can I go on? But oh, the daily, kind of drudge of getting up in the morning and doing a workout and planning my meal, that's not the work that I want to do. This is a little bit of what happens with talent management is we don't want to do that day-to-day work. We just get caught in that rhythm of reactiveness. But I like to set up this as an intentional year-round thing. As a manager, I do it as much as a development opportunity for my staff as I do it for me, to make sure that I can that I'm having these intentional conversations throughout the year, and that also I'm minimizing the chance that there is favoritism happening because I'm a human being, and just like all of you, there's a level of there's going to be certain people that you click with and certain people that you don't. And so if I'm not following this, what happens is are the people that either one, their work just crosses over more with me, end up getting more conversations with me. Or if we click a little bit easier from a style side of it, then all of a sudden they're getting more airtime with me and they're getting more quality airtime with me. I want to avoid that. I want to make sure if somebody reports to me that we're having all the right conversations so that if later I am discussing performance of the people who report to me, I am sharing data that they got to participate in. And then if I'm sharing that with my manager and they're sharing it with their manager, or if I'm sitting in a room with HR and we're doing talent planning, I'm not just speaking from who I prefer. I'm actually speaking about the performance and why that performance matters or why that performance didn't meet the goals. So I set it up on a quarterly basis because I like to follow along with the quarterly financial reporting that most organizations do. So I start off the year with I want to connect with the individual. Remember, human-centric talent planning is what I'm going for. So I want to connect with the individual. This is a little bit of what I consider a career conversation with them. I do not call it a career conversation, and not because I'm trying to hide anything, but because I find that people get caught up in it's all about promotion or what's the next title. And it's that to me is not a creative enough conversation. It's not a strategic enough conversation. So instead, we do a motivation dialogue and we discuss, what sets them up to feel fully engaged on the job, what tends to detract from that. Other things that we discuss is, what kind of support are they looking for? What do they want the team to do to support them? What do they want me to do to support them? What are they looking for from the organization? And then the last bit is what kind of impact do they want to make? And I like to ask them, like, what kind of impact do you want to make this year in the job that you're in? But also beyond that, within your career, what are you looking to do? So, once again, this is kind of serving two things. I'm coaching them on how to think about and discuss what they need to be successful in their career. I find that a lot of people don't know how to do that. And then also, I'm getting to understand them a little bit more so I can tailor what I delegate to them, how I craft out the job, how I set them up for success, and also where I need to kind of clarify some blind spots that they may have around understanding what's going to be expected of them because of where the business is going. So we spend time meeting at the beginning of the year. You can do this at any time, but I like to do it at the beginning of the year. And then I do a discussion with the team. We all get together and I'll have everybody bring in, something that's going on outside of the organization, trends, those types of things. Once again, I'm trying to make sure that they're thinking about the business. So if I'm evaluating the performance, they've been set up for success. They understand what's expected. So we discuss what's going on, we connect it to what's going on in the company, then we look at what it means for our function, and then we look at what it means for our team. And then that way they're walking out after those two conversations with clarity around what they're trying to do in their career, clarity around what the business is up to and what the business needs to think about. And then they go off and they start to draft their performance plan. That includes three business goals and two development goals, one short term for this year, one long term for what they want to do long term in their career. They share that with me. I take all those performance plans. I provide them feedback if needed. And then I share that with my manager and we discuss what the budget is for any development, what the skill building is for any skills that are needed, and how that aligns or doesn't align with what the team or the department needs to do. So these are our strategy kind of meetings at the beginning of the year. Now, I want to emphasize you don't have to wait for the senior leadership to come in and go, here's the goals for the company. I do this like clockwork. If the goals for the company are coming at the same time, great. When we have the big picture conversation, we can discuss it. If the goals, let's say the goals show up in month two, guess what? I have a team meeting. We discuss what they are. We discuss how that may change or not change the direction that we're going. And then they adjust their performance plans based on that. But I want us operating on something that feels kind of predictable. Then, they're going off. We're doing our jobs. We're still meeting one on one. I want to emphasize if you see in the middle here, it says ongoing team and one on one meetings. But those are usually the reactive conversations where if, there's fires or approvals that are needed, we're kind of in the moment getting business done. These discussions that are year round, these are much more intentional, bigger picture kind of conversations. So I have another 30-minute kind of that big picture team dialogue. I like to invite other people in from other teams for these quarterly discussions. Not the first one, that's kind of our team one. But these other ones, that way you get to bring other people in. You get to kind of take down some silos, and you're helping kind of shepherd some cohesion. I go back to performance doesn't happen in a vacuum. Part of what your individual team members are trying to do is to accomplish their goals, navigating the landscape of what it feels like to partner with other departments. So if there's rifts or deep silos, and the teams aren't working well together, then that's added weight for them to be able to accomplish their goals. So as a manager, I want to make sure I'm shepherding, building that cohesion across the different departments that we impact one another. So I invite them into these meetings, or it might be the whole team, it might be one or two people, just kind of depends what's available. We do a check-in. I make sure that they lead this check-in. They share their performance plan. They talk about what the goals are. I want them in the driver's seat. I want them thinking about their performance more than am I telling Heather what she wants to hear or am I winning points? So I'm trying to build their critical thinking skills here. And so we discuss it. If the company uses ratings, we discuss what those ratings look like, even though we're not assigning ratings right now. We have dialogue about it. So it's in the way that we talk about things. I like to fold the rating language into how we talk about things as a team and in our day-to-day discussions. Because if not, by the end of the year, it's always like a guessing game to see if we're on the same page. So anything that you're using, whether it's company values, company mission, any of those things, ratings, competencies, all that stuff has to be used in your day-to-day language around how the job gets done. Because if it's not, it doesn't become the way that people think about things. And that's why a lot of times these talent management processes, the review at the end of the year or the nine box, all that stuff just feels like this thing that floats above what really happens in the business day to day. You have to embed the language. The language has to become part of the culture. So this is how I make sure that that happens. We roll around to Q3. Around Q3, I like to do a well-being check-in. This is a little different than the motivation conversation. This is where I'm checking on, how are they feeling about things? How are things going? What's their level of burnout? Is there anything that's really detracting from their ability to just kind of, lock in their best selves on the job? And what I notice is it tends to feel a little bit different of a conversation than the motivation one. The motivation one is really like, what do you want to do with your career? The well-being one is how are you doing and how are you taking care of yourself and how are we taking care of you while you're working here? I go back to that human-centric approach. It's not just deliver me the widgets and then call it a day. We're not working with computers here. We're working with human beings. And I honestly, someone's probably thinking about AI right now, like, well, how long is that going to last? I think it's going to last quite a while, but I think the nature of it's going to change. And in fact, I think as leaders and HR professionals, we're going to have to get that much more skilled around how to support and engage human beings at their best selves because they're not going to be doing the things that machines and computers can take care of. They're going to be doing the things that require, critical thinking, creative thinking, collaboration, being able to navigate ambiguity, all those things that are really a human skill and have feelings in them. And that's not something that we tend to kind of think about when it comes to our management skills, but that all those things, the more that computers and machinery are able to take off the things that are repetitive, the more that we're going to have to, focus on and hone in on the human aspect of what we do. So these types of conversations make sure that we're not just checking boxes and we're not just doing the mechanical side of things. So that well-being conversation, sometimes I've had things surface where the issue is me, and you have to be prepared for their sense of well-being may be getting hampered with because it may not, you may not be bringing them what they think they need from you. You may need to clarify that, but you need to make sure that you're able to sit in that conversation and not get defensive. The other part of it is I've had them share sometimes that they've had some bad experiences out in the organization, and I've been able to help with that. Sometimes they've surfaced things where it's been even darker stuff like harassment and all those types of things. I'd rather know about it than let it fester underneath the surface. And the reason I started doing this is that at some point I had was leaving and they were doing an exit interview, and I've done this a few times, or they did a stay interview, and it was like, what would it take to make you stay? And I'm like, well, I've already accepted another job. It's a little too late. So I like the well-being conversation, and this is usually I see it towards the end of the summer. People are starting to kind of wane. Depends on what your performance year is, if it's a fiscal or calendar year. But I like to check in on that. Once again, we do another big picture, invite some folks in. They do a performance check-in with me. Then we're closing out the year. We do another big picture. We do a performance check-in. And then we have our performance review. And what's great about that is by the time they do the performance review, there's no surprises. And I had a manager that really stuck to this calendar, and she said, "Oh my gosh, Heather, it was the most boring conversation, the performance review." And I'm like, "Yeah, we're not looking for drama in your performance review." And in reality, if you do this, by the time you get to the review, the employee's writing a self-review that you both have already probably discussed. Like there's no guessing there, and they'll know. Like I like to do that fourth quarterly performance check-in. We have a discussion of how much writing am I expecting them to do? What do they want to make sure that they cover off on during that time? And so the performance review, we usually spend a little bit of time syncing and clarifying anything that we might be confused on. And then the rest of it, we start to open up, what do we want next year to look like? And based on the lessons learned from this year. So having a calendar like that can really minimize the amount of time that you spend because there's a lack of alignment. And so at most, it ends up being 6 hours per direct report that you have and 2.5 hours of intentional with your team. You're having other meetings and whatnot, but you'll be surprised how much time this time investment actually saves. And that's not a lot of time of intentional discussion with direct reports. But this is your data field. So when I say that the data has to be healthy data, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, pyramid rule, flip rule number two, goals, experience, and impact matter far more than ratings and promotions. This is a tough one to get people in on, but I love ratings. They help with alignment. And I love, raises, and I love money. I want to get as much money as I can. I even try to train people to move away from the word promotion because I think it goes with this cycle of what I call the school mentality of I got good grades in 11th grade, so I'm guaranteed 12th grade. So I try to talk to them about, oh, what's the new job you're looking at? And yes, it's moving up in a vertical way, but it's a new job. So let's talk about that. But that performance plan that I mentioned that they put together at the beginning of the year is I have them look at their job, they figure out what are the core three buckets of their job, and then we write a business goal to each of those focus areas. So for me, it's always client management, people management, and program management. That's been the same for 20 some odd years in different workplaces. So there's a steadiness to my goals because when I set a goal for that year in that area, those focus areas don't tend to shift a whole lot. The way I'm achieving them might shift, the tasks and the projects are going to shift, but I don't tie my goals to a project or to a task because those are much more fluid. So it's those focus areas. We set a business goal for each. They do a development goal for how are we going to develop them to get them supported in the job that they're in to do well and meet those goals that we've set. And then that long-term one, which is what are we doing around developing them for the role that they want for the future? And even if they want to stay in their job's not going to stay the same. Technology is changing it. So even if they love where they're at, how do we keep them best in class? That's what that long-term development goal is. So they're walking around with that for the year. When we check in quarterly, we check to see is that still alive and well? Those goals matter the most. At the end of the year, if we're rating their performance and the goals didn't mean anything, they can't take that experience with them. So I'm big on you want to have impactful experience more than you want to just kind of grade grub what's the next rating. I have yet to go to a job interview where someone said, "Hey, what was your performance rating at your last job?" Nobody cares. They care what you're able to do and what kind of impact you have. Then there's pyramid flip number three. Alignment is the goal of every aspect of talent management. And what I'm calling out about that is it has to be that there is a partnership with employees and managers, managers and their leaders, HR and the leadership and employees in the organization, that there is that cohesion. And when we're having conversations, I'm always looking for, is it aligning or is there a gap? And usually if there's issues, there's gaps in the way that we view expectations. So the critical areas that you want to make sure you're driving alignment around to set talent management up for success is first and foremost, are we on the same page around expectations? And expectations are the what, but also the how. So the how around values. Are we here for the same reasons? Because what we care about tends to drive what our behaviors show up as. So, do the company have a set values that they are living and modeling? If it's just on a sheet somewhere and we reference it once a year, that's not living and modeling. Here's the thing. Every company is operating off of a set of values, whether those are intentionally chosen or whether those are intentionally vocalized. You work somewhere, pretty quickly you pick out what they actually value in the organization. So I recommend being intentional about it. The goals, we want to make sure that we're on the same page about the goals, and then the competencies. Whether you're formal about those competencies or not, There is a level of, do employees and managers, are they on the same page around how things are expected to get executed? I've been in those end of year talent management conversations where a manager is putting somebody up for a new role and to move them into a different level of leadership. And someone will say they've had so many complaints against them. They're in so much conflict with other people. They're like, yeah, but they hit the deadline and they hit the goals and they make us money. And I will say the sun is setting on that because the more and more data is pulling around employee engagement surveys, what it's doing to other people's well-being and what that's costing in terms of health and benefits, the data shows that if people only deliver on the what and they destroy the culture on the how, that it actually ends up costing the organization a lot of money. So those are the three areas on expectations. Investment. What are we going to invest on developing people so that we don't always have to hire externally? I think it's great to hire externally to bring in fresh perspectives. But when a company has to hire externally because they haven't taken the time to build the internal talent, you're going to constantly be churning through people. What are we investing in resources, whether that's technology, office space, whatever it might be? And then also, what is the new talent that we should strategically be bringing into the place? And we're looking at what are the skills and experience that it makes sense to bring from the outside so that we're not just becoming a stagnant organization. Last but not least, measurement. How are we tracking? How are we evaluating? And how are we making decisions so that once again, we're minimizing the human nature of we're all biased about something. We're all kind of flawed and have our own way of looking at the world. So having some method to the madness around how we measurement. So we get in the room, we're talking about the same thing. Number four, year-round dialogue is more important than year-end reviews. And I think I've made that point. I'll call out this model that I like to use. I mentioned before that context matters. I like the cater model. You're catering that dialogue to make sure that there's alignment and catering it to what the individuals need. But it's basically making sure it doesn't have to go in order, but it's making sure that you're covering off on the context. What was going on during this time? Action. What did they do? What are you seeing? Timing. What pacing was it? Did it hit the deadline? And then results. What impact was it? Like I said, it doesn't have to go in order, but it's a good model to use to help people kind of get a little bit more intentional about how they do performance feedback. I like to start with the end in mind, so I always start with the results. Number five, last but not least, I know we're wrapping up here, is cultivating a high performance. Cultivating high performance is more effective than collecting high performers. So that's what I mean is instead of this idea that you're just like, oh, we've got to find the right person. Sure, there's some of that. But if you're doing this kind of year-round feeding and development of the individuals that work there already, you're going to get much more return on investment. I find that everybody who's in a job that aligns with what their talents are and their skills are, and they're in a place that they feel valued and appreciated, that you end up getting high levels of performance from them. And yeah, sometimes people need to move on because, the alignment of what they want to do and what the business is looking to do isn't there anymore. But I've yet to find a person that I go, oh, they're a low performer, as in life. I don't see it that way. It's always the context matters. And I'd rather build someplace that if anybody comes in here, they're actually set up for success and they've just got to make that choice. Last but not least, I'm just going to call out this model of this helps you when it comes to making sure that you're talking about performance and not talking about individuals as if you're judging them. And this little model here is just based off of how our brain works. We start with what did we see? What are the themes or patterns of what we saw? And then what was the impact of that? That is the stuff that we should be discussing on the job, whether it's working or whether it's not working. But our brain keeps going and we start to think of the person's character, what their intention was. Were they motivated? Were they not motivated? Are they thinking strategically, not thinking strategically? Do I think they're lazy? Do I think that they are rude? All those things are judgment of the person and their character. And the litmus test that I use is if I'm talking about something that happens inside of their mind, so their intention, their thought process, their intrinsic motivation, all those things, I don't know. But what I do know for sure is what I saw, the green language, and how I saw it impact things. And I can even share how it impacted me. But if I start talking about what I think about them, even in the positive, it just starts to go into a difficult route. And then our brain keeps going and it starts to go for patterns of, oh, who do I think they're similar? And it might be something harmless or seemingly harmless as, oh, everybody over in HR is like this, or everybody on the second floor is like this. or it goes into some more toxic ones, such as, oh, that's how label whatever generation you want to throw in there. Or it's based off of race or gender. We're starting to bucket people together, and we stop seeing what it is that we're actually here at the job to talk about, and that's the performance. This approach is simple, but it is not easy. I go back to the workout. It is the day in and day out approach. But when you get an organization that's doing that day in and day out, the talent planning part of it almost fills in itself. We want to avoid that event-based talent management. It's just a band-aid on gangrene if you really wanted an ugly description. All right, folks, I know I gave you a ton of information here. I am going to be sending you the recording. I just want to keep in mind that if this is something that you're looking to dive deeper into, we're here. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to hop on a call and do a free thought partnership call. We do needs assessment, talent planning, team facilitation. We help you do it with OD and designing strategy, as well as being, skill training, as well as coaching. Okay, I'm going to hang out for a little bit for some questions, but also I want to remind you that we've got another webinar coming up that goes well with the one that I just talked about. It's going to be about ways of working or rules of engagement for the team. A lot of time teams aren't performing because they haven't agreed to the how that I talked about. How are we going to engage? Especially nowadays, there's a lot of room for how do we discuss tough conversations? How do we really create an environment for productive conflict? So check out this QR code. Joe Jokowitz is going to be facilitating that. I know a lot of you have had experience with him and enjoy his insights. And so if you haven't met him yet, I still recommend that you sign up for it. It's going to be good stuff. All right. Thank you for those of you who have to head out, but anybody have questions that I can answer for you? All right, I've got one that just came in. What do I do if I do this as a manager, but I'm not seeing other managers do this? It's a very fair question. I say start with yourself. And honestly, I have seen this with myself is that when I'm doing it and my team is doing well, I find that either my manager or other managers are coming to me for help and wanting to look into it. And I say start with your home, get that nice and ready, and then start to move out to the neighborhood and then out to the city and then out, you could kind of keep spreading what you're doing. And it kind of depends on the position that you sit in. If you sit in HR, you can help influence that quite a bit. If you sit in senior leadership, you can even make that, more of a compliance for the people that are reporting to you. But at the very least, as a manager, I can run my team this way. And I've always done that. And that's a requirement. If you're on my team, we're doing these conversations. All right, folks. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So I just want to thank you for your time. And we hope to see you at our webinar the next month. But definitely reach out to us. We want to get into conversations with you. And we love partnering with you. Take care.